Okay, welcome back to my YouTube channel, which is Not an Expert. Today I was going to do a short video on the Lee Pro 1000, and over the years I made a list of all the different modifications I've made to it, and there were over 20, and I decided to go through and pick the 4 most important changes I've made to make this a reliable press. And the interesting thing I found out is after I went through the list of 20, the top 4 all had to do with primers, putting the primer in the shell. So if you have a Lee Pro 1000 and you just don't feel like messing with it, and you don't want to design anything or buy any additional parts for it to stabilize it out, the best thing you can do is buy a hand primer, prime all your shells offline, and then feed them into the press. Your troubles would probably go to 0 after that. So that being said, I'll show you the 4 changes that I made that made a huge improvement over the reliability of my press. The first change that I made to the press, and these are in no order of importance, but for those who aren't familiar, the primers come in a little tray here. They've since redone the tray, but it's basically the same idea. And to get these down this trough to feed into your tray here, into your platform, they need to be shaken. So when you first buy this thing, this trough here is nice and flimsy and it has a lot of spring to it. After a few years it loses all that spring, and you can see it's not doing what its job is. And if you put the spring back into it, now you can hear it rattling and shaking back and forth. So I made a new spring shaker. Looks like that, pretty simple, and I'll reference how to make this down below in the notes. At one time I made these and sold these on eBay, but I don't do that anymore, so I'm sorry, you have to make them yourself if you're interested. This just slides in here, goes on, and you can hear the difference there. And it works quite well, and you don't have to worry about this spring wearing out. It'll last forever. Okay, if you notice here, here's the parts counter. I've got, if you're interested in making a parts counter, I've got all those plans and plans for many other adaptions for the Lee Pro 1000 excuse me, on my YouTube channel. You can go through there and search through there. There's quite a few. But the next item I'm going to show you, item number 2 here, it sounds like a simple thing here, but when you're working the press, especially for new people, if you've been doing it for years, you get a feel for it, you know what's right, what's wrong. But for somebody new, you cannot see over in station 2 when the primer has been seated in there correctly. Sometimes you'll be feeding a shell through, and depending on people like me that have range brass that comes from everywhere underneath the sun, some of the holes here are quite large, and the primer takes almost no energy to seat. You come down and you can't even feel the primer seat. Other times, if you have range brass that's been from the military that's been crimped over, you'll come down and you'll hit a hard stop and you think the primer's all the way in there, but in actuality the primer is not in there at all. It's still waiting to be pushed in all the way. And sometimes if you're not watching what you're doing, you only push the primer in halfway. And then it'll get caught on the side here, and you'll have to back it up and pull it out. But this is a real simple way right here. If you look at this line here, it'll take you a little while to do it. I've got a video on how to do this. But if you see, when that plate carrier comes up and it's exactly on the line, you put the primer to the correct depth. If you push it all the way forward and this goes below that line, that means there's no primer in station number 2 and it hasn't fed correctly. In the original video I did on this one, I actually had a Christmas tree lights here with red, green, and yellow for different caution states of where the plate carrier was, or is I should say. I found that not necessary, so I took off the Christmas tree light, and now I just use that. But in the whole video, it'll show you how to do the Christmas tree lights. The next thing that I found out is the primers come down through this trough here. And also, before you start using this, you always should clean this trough with a pipe cleaner or some other type of cleaner. Make sure it's clean. That's probably the biggest reason a lot of people have trouble that this gets dirty. If you could see here, it actually has an open groove at the top, so any dirt or loose powder from above can fall down into that chute and jam it up. That being said, I found that if you stick to the primers that Lee recommends, you'll have less problems. One time during a shortage, I could not find my favorite primers, which are the CCIs. I had to buy a different brand that everybody said that worked in their presses. But since these are gravity fed as they're coming down through here, any bit of resistance won't let them slide easily. And I compared the new primers to the CCI primers. The bottom of the CCI primers were like glass, super smooth, would slide right down there. And the off brand that I bought that worked fine in my gun did not like to slide in there. So I had to put a pusher primer in there. The pusher primer is a very simple part, and again, I'll put this down in the notes below if you want to build one, and I'll show you how it works here. It just clips onto the side. So here is how the primer pusher is attached. There's a spring on the other side that loads up here, so every time this comes up, it loads up the spring, and then when this comes down, the spring will push this down. This little paddle comes down into the trough, latches in behind the primers, and pushes it forward into the carrier plate there. Works pretty well. Every time you go up, it reloads the spring again. The last item here is a low primer alert, and you can see here if there's not primers coming into here, if there are primers in the trough, it'll lock up like that, because it has primers to push. Once it has primers to push, this will go all the way down. So it was a very simple thing to add a low primer alert. So on item number 4, if you remember that if this goes down all the way down here, this is the opposite side you just saw. If this goes all the way down, that means that there are no primers feeding into there. So it was a real simple fix to put a low primer alert into there. Just a little micro switch, and you can see now if that goes too low because of no primers, it sets off the alarm. And it does make reloading a lot easier because it takes you one last thing that you have to monitor constantly to make sure it's working. And this has saved me a few times because I could do other things, not have to monitor this, and the alarm would go off here. I go, oh yeah, I should have been doing that or watching that. It's one less thing to watch, so that low primer alarm I find very, very useful. And again, there's over 20 different adaptations and changes I've made to the Lee Pro 1000. These are the 4 that I found most important. So I'll give links to these below. And if you wanted to, you could go to my YouTube channel, Not an Expert, and you can see a lot of other issues that I found that might be relevant to you in a Lee Pro 1000 user. And in case I didn't say, I only reload 9mm, so everything I do is with 9mm. Thanks for watching, and hope that you found this useful.